Welcome to ESG Decoded. I am your host, Amanda Hsieh, today for this episode. And with me, I have Jonathan Hall, the Director of Belonging from Neiman Marcus Group. I'm really excited to have Jonathan on the podcast where we're going to talk about really a lot about what he does at Neiman. And for me, it's top of mind because I'm on the DEI steering committee at work. And we relatively recently also got the results of our employee engagement survey back. So from my, position, I've been thinking about, how can we create this sense of belonging more? What can we do more in the DEI committee or employee engagement? I'm really excited to be talking to Jonathan to learn really best practices here. Hey, Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm well. I'm Jonathan Hall. I use the pronouns he, him, his. I am the Director of Belonging for Neiman Marcus Group. And for those who are listening to this podcast, I'm a 6'3.5" round up, maybe 4 on some days, maybe 2 on other days. African American male. I'm wearing glasses. I have an printed shirt. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I'm bringing everyone along in the practice. For those who are maybe watching the video on YouTube, you know what you're looking at.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me do the same. Asian American female. Approximately 5'3" on a good day. Again, if I'm wearing some heels, maybe 5'4". Today I'm sporting a simple gray cardigan with a black tee underneath, identifying as a she and her. Jonathan, I would love to hear from you. How do you define belonging? What does belonging mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's a word now that's being more used frequently, but it truly centers back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, where everyone has a sense of belonging. It's this feeling of connectedness that they need in order to feel secure, and it's an innate part of the human being, right? But to make that more simple, we all want to feel seen, we want to feel valued, we want to feel heard, we want to be appreciated for our contributions. All of these things are central to what you were just talking about in terms of associate engagement practices. But belonging is the outcomes one wants to achieve in effective diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. It's not about leaning too heavily on one area. It's wanting to make sure that everyone has a voice at the table to thrive and an equitable opportunity to do so. And while doing that, you bring more diverse perspectives along and you make everyone feel like they're included in the process. That is a very big task to take on, right? Because to truly do it in our sense, as we are, a for-profit company that provides goods and services to customers, we also operate in a sense that we have to create a sense of belonging for our customers, for our brand partners, those who we, procure some of the best merchandise from around the world and bring to the stores across the states. And then also to our associates, who we have over 10,000 of them employed here in the U.S. as well as in India. And so doing so has to be done with a level of care. And one of the things I love so much about it is that, we have a strong history of belonging dating back to our founders, but even more present day, our, CEO, Jeff Van Romdok, he's, one of the few openly gay CEOs in the U.S. And what is important about that is when he came, he had this very fresh perspective on creating an area of the company where we truly lead with love as a practice. And by doing so, you can have those conversations that are tough because you're doing it from a place of active empathy. You can, advocate for change. You can do things for the betterment of each other by leading with love. And that's just such a great place and a perspective to lean from as we chart our course to where we want to go in the future.
I think maybe we can, I'd love to start a little bit of understanding, how this is grounded in Neiman Marcus's history and start and why it's part of its DNA. And then again, kind of then maybe that then helps our listeners understand why it was important, why, your CEO, was able to do what he's able to do now. But can you share a little bit from how this is grounded or how this started at Neiman? Or you said it was part of the founders,
Yes.
the founding of Neiman's.
It's a fun story. one that actually, I've spent a lot of my working years in retail, and it's a story that I didn't know too formally whenever I first came. Everyone has heard about Stanley Marcus, right? Who is this big pioneer in the fashion industry. But if you actually go back to our founding in 1907, Carrie Marcus Neiman, her husband A.L., and her brother Herbert Marcus Sr. had sold a business in Georgia, relocated to Texas, and had this dream of starting a store, a mercantile that can deliver luxury product, right? And that in and of itself, right? We can pause in 1907 and think about the landscape and say, oh my God, there was a female co-founder of an organization that is a preeminent luxury retailer today, 115, 16 years ago. And that was also 13 years before she had the right to vote. And she was forming a company and getting on a train, traveling to New York by herself, being the first buyer, bringing it back, building this organization, scaling number of stores, overcoming a giant fire that broke out in the company in 1913, I think it was, that decimated the initial store. I mean, that's 6 years from its initial founding, and that your store catches fire, right? Like, we can think about today what would happen in the first 6 years if our business caught fire, what we would do. Within weeks, they had already opened up another location, the same location that we operate in downtown Dallas today, and continued on, right? Like, they were progressive, they were entrepreneurs, they overcame adversity. She then went on to, in 1950, become the chairwoman of our board. That's 1950, right? Like, chairwoman of our board, one of the first few. And that was after the passing of her brother, and the board unanimously voted her in. And then at that point, Stanley Marcus takes on the helm and, continues being one of the founding family members to chart our legacy, brings in this idea of fortnights, ushers us through the civil rights movement in Texas, and did some great work bringing diverse perspectives in at that time, and was one of the advocates in Dallas to really talk about how businesses need to really lay on their values as a charted course in order to see the road ahead, and very adamantly told business owners in Dallas to not be scared and to speak openly about your values, because if you're not, then you'll be silenced, right? And that's so much great substance there, from going on to doing fortnights, which everyone knows about, where he brought the world to Dallas, to being a pioneer of progress. Those things are integral to our journey ahead, and allows us to think about how do we create and champion revolutionary experiences for our customers, for our associates, and for our brand partners. But when you have that strength of history that you can say, wow, okay, we had, a German Jewish family in the 1900s that went on to build this preeminent luxury retailer, right? Known across the world for the work that we do. It's really refreshing to be able to have a position that I can lean on that history to say that everyone's voice is valued and included here at Neiman Marcus Group, because we come from a very diverse point of view.
Thank you for that history lesson. I knew some of it, but I didn't know all of it. So that's amazing to hear about. And like you said, that gives you that foundation to grow upon. And you mentioned right now, currently, it's really, I loved how you talked about those three kind of stakeholder groups: your employees, your customers, and your brand partners. Can we dive a little bit more into those like groups and kind of your strategy or tactics at Neiman with creating belonging among those stakeholders?
Yeah, I think for me, it's framed up under three real major pillars, if you will. It's, champion inclusive marketplaces. Really speaks to how do we deliver product and services to our customers that meet them where they are and what they value. There's some really great research out there today that says that 58% of customers shop or advocate for brands that support their values. And even more, population at large, 60% of them actually want to work for companies that's supportive of their values. So you got 60% of the population said that they're value centric when they choose where they want to work. You have roughly 60% saying that they want to shop someplace that's value centric. And so inclusive marketplaces has to be a major part of any retailer's strategy go forward, because if not, you're leaving quite a bit of the customer segmentation aside. So inclusive marketplaces also includes training and development around bias that creeps into the workplace or into the marketplace. It's around creating supplier diversity strategies that are effective, both for goods for retail and goods not for retail. It's really about business diversity. It's also around the marketing initiatives and how you bring diverse perspectives to the table. There's also another part of the work that's around advancing workplace equity, right? Workplace equity goes beyond just these prominent external standards like Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, which, we received a perfect score in our first year of filing. Bloomberg's Gender Equality Index, Disability Equality Index, which, our first year of filing that, we received a 90 out of 100 score. Those indices do a great job of understanding the business processes, practices, and procedures, and are they truly equitable and inclusive of the various constituencies in which they're trying to serve, whether that's the LGBTQ community, women in the workplace, multicultural workplace, people with disabilities, etc. They're a great foundation, but the equity has to come first, right? They're just a validating point. They say, have you done the work? Yes or no? And are you also creating avenues to further the work as well? So it's not just about, are you doing it, but are you also advocating for the work too? And then there's also advancing workforce diversity, which has a multitude of different things. But I like to think about it as, if you can find a way to widen the aperture of the people who want to work for your organization, you can get more people in the hiring funnel. You get more diverse perspectives at the table. You can champion a more inclusive and innovative workforce as a result of purely starting at the very, very beginning and saying, is everyone's voice here at the table and heard, right? And so one of the things that we did to truly make some progress there was establish a goal. First thing you have to say is, where do we want to go? We did some benchmarking through a credible third-party benchmarking firm, and we found that we set pretty much right in the middle point when we established this goal back in 2022, February of 2020. At that point, our officer metrics were 18.2% non-white. And so what that looks like for us is vice president and a little above, 18% of that workforce, if you will, self-disclosed that they were non-white. To get to 75th percentile, we needed to grow to X percent. To get to, the 90th percentile, we needed to get to greater than 21% of our organization. I think there's a lot more room to go over that 21%. But that's where we had to start, was like, how do we essentially get to best in class? And from there, establish that goal, you can start to put some work behind getting there. And it's not about quotas or metrics or any of those things, right? It's about aspirations of where do you want your workforce representation to be, and what is the makeup of your current workforce. We are a majority female organization where 59% of our workforce identifies as female. And that's at every level of the organization. There's only about a 3 to 9 point deviation by leadership level, where 57% of our board is gender diverse, right? Like that's huge, right? That means that women lead at this organization, which for all intents and purposes also tells you the aptitude for risk tolerance, the structure of the business, the innovation of the business, because there's been many studies that when women hold senior leadership roles, the organization is more profitable, more innovative, and also has more risk tolerance. And so from there, we established the goal, we evolved our hiring practices, we brought on a new team member who's purely focused on belonging initiatives and inclusive hiring practices. I didn't say diverse hiring practices, I said inclusive hiring practices. And the reason why I say it that way is because when you can think about how do you make sure everyone is included, then automatically you're already talking about, is there enough diversity in the room? And what is that diversity? We're not talking about just race. We're talking about race, gender, sexual orientation, disability status, veteran status, all of the various different hiring practices that lead to a more robust organization. That's their focus. And then also partnering with organizations that help promote those types of activities for us. National Black MBA Association, Prospanica, Disability In, Lesbians Who Tech, right? Various different organizations that help to give us the level of talent pool that is broad enough that we can make true on those observations or those aspirations to get to 21% by 2025 and to 28% by 2030. So it comes down to, are you actually looking at your overall business practices and saying, do we have the right policies and procedures in place to achieve our goals? And if not, how do we inject bias interrupters, if you will, into the work stream to ensure that we can still achieve those goals? Joan C. Williams out of UC Berkeley, I believe is where she is, wrote an incredible book. It's called Bias Interrupted. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's fantastic. It's so rooted in evidence, and it's how we base a lot of our work in belonging, is finding the avenues where there is an interrupter that you can inject into the process or the procedure so that bias gets interrupted. We know that cognitive bias is innate. It was a way in which the human brain and evolution protected itself, right? But we also are cognitive beings that can set back and say, how do we interrupt the bias along the way to ensure that we're not perpetuating issues of discrimination or unfair practices, etc. During her research, she found that when a woman is in the final interview loop, she is 96 times more hired to be 96 times more likely to be hired. And when a person of color is, they are 196 times more likely to be hired. This is about odds, right? It's how do we create more opportunities and an equitable access for people of all shapes and sizes to have the opportunity to succeed. And when you widen that aperture, you then have the ability to see more diverse perspectives presented. So that's marketplace inclusion, workforce diversity, and workplace equity, summed up in probably the most concise way I could probably do.
No, that was an excellent job, of doing that in the short amount of time that we have for this podcast. And I haven't read that book, and I'm definitely going to download it after this. But thank you for sharing that. And I think about how, retail it's such a personal experience, right? And for me, the idea of having your employees understanding the lived experience of your shoppers and be able to reflect that and be kind of curating for them and educating on whatever products you're offering for them and how it will work for them is so important. And so thank you for sharing that, because it kind of brings it a little bit more tangible to me. I remember that you mentioned that Neiman started us with benchmarking, understanding what the average is, what's the best in class, and kind of setting those goals. And I know certain companies and organizations are afraid of setting goals. Do you have any advice for companies who are hesitant or, afraid of setting goals as a kind of a starting point? Because for me, just being in business, you kind of need goals and deadlines to work towards. But,
Right.
And then you create your action plan and strategy or whatever, to get to that goal or aspiration or whatever you want to call target, whatever you want to call it. But I know some organizations are hesitant. Would you have any advice of, why it was so important or meaningful to really consider it?
I think that people are scared of setting goals or aspirations that are not grounded in their strategy. And you also have to base it with you have to understand the capacity and the context of your organization as well. And so for us, it was easy to establish that goal because we already had a diverse makeup. The question was, are we actually representing the true diversity of our organization and of our customer demographic? And if the answer is no, then how can we actually lead into the future of the organization without having the right level of diversity in leadership roles too? It's a business imperative, right? It's not about just saying, oh, this is where we want to go because this is the flavor of the month, if you will. That's not what it's about, right? But I think any organization who is looking to say, where do I start? They first need to ask their employees what's important to them. And so for us, we started out on this journey with a materiality study that was third party, as well as a customer satisfaction, if you will, kind of net promoter score, if you will, for employees that told us, what things did we value as an associate population. This was before I stepped into this role. And there were really four really key things. It was flexibility. It was belonging. It was total rewards. And it was people development. And so, belonging is a key function of many different avenues, but they, at that point, spoke to diverse representation. When you double click into it, it was around diverse representation. It's around associate community groups and giving voice to diverse populations and groups, so ERGs. It was about inclusive marketplaces. Belonging itself rose very true both for our customers as well as for our associates. And from there, whenever you read the fine print, if you will, whenever your associates are saying they want to see them represented in senior leadership roles, you have to start saying, well, did I hear you? Did we listen? And what are we going to do about it? And so when you have the ability to do that as an organization and say, I heard you, we listened, and we're doing this about it, the company then can rally behind it. And you can also have proof points to the organization and to senior leaders on why it's important. 80% of your associate population, or whatever that number might be, is saying that they want this and this is a key part of their value proposition. Without attacking that, you're going to see major turnover numbers. For us, we saw the complete opposite. We did that same survey 18 months later and saw a 34% increase in that positive satisfaction score. And we reduced our time to hire by 31%. So we saw greater satisfaction, and we also had more diverse people enter the organization, and we reduced the amount of time that it took for those people to actually come into the organization and for hiring managers to place roles and to continue to drive business outcomes.
What I'm also hearing too is that the employers need to ask, right? That you initiated the survey, you asked for your stakeholders' opinions, you actually took action on the feedback that they gave you. And the other thing I'm also taking is that it is important to, in a way, try to measure this. And as you were able to communicate the improvements in the survey results, but also there's practical business results too of reducing the time to hire and get great new associates in. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I would love to learn more about that third stakeholder group that you talked about, brand partners. I think we touched a little bit about it, but I would love to hear a little bit more about how Neiman is bringing, I know it's connected to the marketplace and the offering that you're giving your customers, but I would love to hear a little bit more in the last few minutes that we have and kind of understand how Neiman is, let's say, expanding DEI beyond its immediate team to maybe its extended team.
I think that is a great way of framing it, because we are the best way to put this is that as a luxury retailer, we have so much onus and responsibility to bring diverse perspectives into the luxury industry, because we carry a lot of weight in the ability to do so. And as a result, our business practices can help many different diverse entities succeed. So we said, what do we need to do from supplier diversity perspective? Number one, we need to find out, where are we? Again, kind of back to the original framing is what's our baseline? So we developed a practice to understand what was our baseline for retail sales and retail cost of goods for diverse owned entities. And then also on our indirect side for non-retail, what was that kind of flow through put? From there, we knew that we had $29.6 million in addressable spend, if you will, that was on diverse entities, right? Spent with diverse entities who had majority stake ownership and also U.S. national citizenship. We decided to focus on ownership because we felt like it was the most impactful way for us to also give economic value, if you will, back into those communities. And so our edit itself says, are you Black, Hispanic or Latino, AAPI, Native American, or LGBTQ owned business? And if so, you would qualify for our diverse edit online. Now, in our non-retail side, it encompasses all various aspects of diversity that a true supplier diversity program has, from disability status, veteran, small business, women-owned business, etc. But we quantify that more smaller segment of the market. One, because we had a lot of opportunity there, but two, we felt like it was the right place to focus our efforts to bring measurable change in the luxury space. But you can't just measure; you have to also put some actions in place. And so we, partner with a company called Raise Fashion Network and provide masterclass series to help actually teach and train some of the best practices to succeed in the retail space. And on the other side of that, for our non-retail, we actually are working with the NMSDC, the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And then we leverage that and go even more so and say, hey, you know what? The pipeline needs to also start in colleges as well. And we have a partnership with a Fashion Scholarship Fund where we actually have a scholarship that gives 10 various scholars across the country, many of who are attending HBCUs and HSIs, a $10,000 grant to study sustainable and ethical fashion. It's important to talk about sustainable and ethical because they are both equally important, and they need to also be interwoven to truly get measurable impact. So it's a multi-pronged approach to driving business diversity, not just supplier diversity.
I love that. And I love that you talked about sustainable and ethical fashion, because I think there's a lot of, it recognizes the environmental and the social impacts that fashion can have on our planet, let's say. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for imparting all this wisdom on us today. We will, of course, link up the book that you recommended, also Neiman's most recent People and ESG report on the website as well. So people who want to understand a little bit more can have some resources to look at. But Jonathan, thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.